This is really about how to implement and how to understand what kind of workplace culture, but I also want you to kind of think of it in terms of the culture of you. You know, each of us is our own individual island amongst other islands. And so I just want to let you know there are going to be things in this talk that really can be applied to you individually, as well as how you are with one another. And I just want to let you know, I come from a background. My grandfather was born and raised in Guadalajara. So while I don't speak Spanish, I share the Hispanic background with you. And I just honor you as consequential leaders inside of your organization and being good as gold. I just want to acknowledge you for what I love about all the times I've presented to Hispanic groups are the common values that we have. And I was even thinking about more of them this morning. What I feel whenever I'm in the presence of a group of Hispanic people is I feel the values of hospitality. I feel it this morning with all of the glitches. I feel the values of celebration, of joy, of love, of respect. And I'm just honored to be with you as really consequential leaders in your organization, because our world needs consequential leaders. So I just want to go ahead and jump into this presentation. I wanted to start with this quote by Mikhail Gorbachev, because I think it's representative of what you're trying to do in generating opportunities for both Latinos, but also for the whole way of operating in diversity. And it's a really important distinction that peace is not unity in where we're similar, but it's unity in diversity, which is in the comparison and the conciliation of differences. And that's easier said than done. So I want you to know that peace that conciliates differences is a choice. And it's not for people that are faint of heart. It takes a lot of courage to remain who you are, but also respect the differences and even find the ways to appreciate the differences in others. So I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that you are a stand for diversity and for opportunity. I also ask you to write down any questions you have, because we're going to have time, hopefully have time at the end, and write down any ahas. If you cannot share them at the end, you may want to just email them to the group or put them in the chat box. It's very important for you to do that so that you ground what you learn. I wanted to start this talk by really focusing on what is the goal of this talk? What is the end game for you looking at transformation? Transformation, any trend that's going on is going to require a people transformation, as well as whatever the agile or digital transformation is, or the transformation of your business. So that requires an end game of how do we all show up personally responsible, fully engaged in our life, bringing our A game forward, managing ourselves and managing our relationships with other people. So I'm actually going to tell you a true story that I often use to open conferences and presentations, because we often make things more complicated than they need to be. And so this is a story of an 8th grade student who was in a classroom where they adopted a responsibility-based model, but only in that classroom. And so the teacher knew that her goal was to help these students be personally responsible. And she knew that her goal was to help them pick up responsibility. And she wasn't quite sure how to do that sometimes. So she asked me if I would help her with that. And so she invited me to a classroom meeting. And into the classroom meeting comes this 8th grade student. And he says, I'm being bullied by a homeroom teacher. Now, right now, there's a lot of bullying going on in the world, so we can all kind of relate to that concept. And so when it was his turn to talk, he said, we've been given this new tool called a peace pledge. And the peace pledge is where you put your hand on your heart and you say to all your co-students and your teachers, I pledge to use my words and my actions for peace, which sounds wonderful as a tool. But just like a lot of tools, they're kind of brought in on a faulty premise or a faulty mindset, because what he was objecting to is the teacher was shaking her finger at the students with this stern look and saying, if I catch any of you not doing the pledge, I'm going to give you a detention. So he said, I don't have a problem with the tool. I just have a problem with being bullied. So the teacher looked at me and she said, Judy, how would I transfer responsibility in this situation? Will you show me? So I said to the student, do you want peace in the school? And he said, well, yeah, I do. And I said, do you want it with the teacher who's bullying you? Talk about reconciling differences. And he said, yes, I do. And I said, okay, good. Are you willing to look at where you're doing war with her? And he was like very defensive initially. Me, I'm the one being bullied. Why would I have to look at my part, you know? And I said, yeah, but the person who's doing the bullying isn't here saying that they want to be a stand for peace. So are you willing to look? And he said, okay. I said, do you ever say bad things about this teacher? And he said, well, yeah, I hate her. And I said, did you ever think that maybe hate and gossip is a war stance? And he said, well, I guess so. And I said, have you ever tried to go to her and talk to her reasonably when she's not in a threatening mode? And he said, well, no, we're all afraid of her. And I said, did you know that when you're afraid of someone, you're an attack to them? And he said, no, what are you talking about? And I said, if a dog comes running up to you and he's attacking, you know, he's got an attack stance and his tail is down and his teeth are bared. If you become more fearful of the dog, does the dog become more hostile or less hostile? And he said, well, the dog becomes more hostile. And I said, exactly, why? And he said, I don't know, I never thought of it. And I said, the reason is that whenever you go to someone in a state of fear of them, you're projecting to that person that they're in the monster box, that they are an enemy, and they'll return the favor. And he said, well, I didn't realize that. And I said, of course, you probably were never taught that fear is attack. I said, now that you see that you are doing war by gossip, hate, and fear, what do you want now with your intention of peace? And he said, well, now I want to go to her and have a civil conversation, but I'm not quite sure how to do it. And I said to him, well, isn't it great? You have all these classmates and you have time to practice new things. And wouldn't you like to just work on that? And he said, I would love that. What was really important for you to remember about yourself and those around you, whether you're a parent or a leader or just leading a team in something, is that when he raised up his level of personal responsibility, other people did. His classmates were saying things like, I'll go with you. I've been in war with her too, and I didn't realize it. Even the teacher said, I want to leave teaching. You can see I love my kids and I'm a good teacher, but I realize we have all these posters on the school walls about respect and accountability. And yet we don't have classes for that, except for in my room. She said, it's about as crazy as saying math is important and reading is important, but not having a math or reading class. So she left and worked with us in school reform. But I want you to know that because in an organization, even if it's your family, we are operating out of systems that we're not questioning. And we're bringing in tools, expecting them to work on faulty mindsets without really having the end game in mind. And I want you to consider the fact that this young man was learning how to manage a relationship with an authority figure. A lot of you probably can't do that in your lives when it comes to those levels that are often imposed inside of organizations. And it's important to know that your end game is, how can I learn to manage relationships? How can I learn to manage my own engagement, my own productivity? And that's really what I want you to, on the understanding part about a responsibility-based approach. So core to that is what interferes with responsibility and what do we do about it? So we use the work of Alfred Adler, who was around during the time of Freud and Jung, but just didn't get as much press. And I believe it's because his concepts were sort of ahead of the times. He was the one that coined the phrase inferiority complex. For those of you who read or watch Brene Brown, she calls it shame. Same thing. He basically said that if we enter into feelings of inferiority, and I'll read a quote that he said, it really is the basis of all struggles in ourselves and between people. So what most people present, though, is this face this facade of, okay, everything is great, everything is fine. When underneath it, there's often a sense of inferiority or shame or worthlessness. Even if it isn't constant, it's coming and going depending upon the conditions and conversations that we experience with ourselves or with other people. So Adler said that when we enter these inferiority complex feelings, it can rule our mental life. And it creates a sense of incompleteness and unfulfillment. And then that is what causes uninterrupted struggle between people and within people. So some of those struggles are really obvious when we think about them. The internal struggles are all this whole list here. And we see the opioid addictions. We see the amount of people that are on antidepressants. We know that Gallup says year after year that 70% of people in workforces are disengaged to at least a level of quiet quitting, as they're calling it right now, or even to a level of serious sabotage going on. And so that's all coming from inside of people. One of the most popular books right now is That the Body Keeps the Score, which is all about trauma and how we carry it in our bodies. The external struggles are all the ways that we show up, win, lose. And I want to say this up front because you are consequential leaders. I believe there's a real push in the world right now in a good way to move out of win-lose to win-win. And it requires people to have a level of consciousness that takes them out of the inferiority complex, that takes them out of the conditions and conversations that create it. Because all we have to do is spend 5 minutes on social media or watching the news, and we see all the isms, all the war, all the estrangement, all the misbehavior, all comes from this core sense of inferiority complex that we're experiencing individually and collectively. So the real question becomes, how do you fix that problem? And all movement forward in life, it requires a transformation of people. It's people change. So we can't afford to be people that don't care about people. My mission, as Alex probably shared that I couldn't hear it, I was so unfocused, is to create a world where all people love their lives. Well, I used to have marketing people say to me, owners don't care about people loving their lives. They don't care about their employees loving their lives. And I said, I don't want to work with those people that don't want their people to love their lives. And a lot of business leaders are realizing, if I don't care about people loving their lives, it's going to cost the bottom line at the very minimum. And hopefully they start having an experience of people loving their lives so that they can see how not only profitable, but how abundant and how joyful that is. And so what Adler said is the antidote to inferiority complex is when we have healthy belonging and significance. And when we have that, we actually feel four core needs are being met. One of them is to feel empowered. And you know that there's whole communities of people that do not feel empowered. They don't feel like they have adequate equity. They don't have adequate voice or influence or power. And how important that is to feeling a sense of belonging and significance. This one is a little harder to recognize because people always want to think it means loved. It doesn't, it means lovable. Lovable is when you see a person and you see their magnificence and you are curious about what they think and what they feel. And you're not curious from a place of converting them or fixing them or changing them or correcting them. I was raised in a very loving family, but my parents in particular did not know how to make us children feel lovable. They didn't want to learn anything from us. They didn't really want to hear our perspective. They were very respectful about it, but they were basically, let me tell you how to think and feel and who to be. And it really took a toll on me. And it's really the basis of why I do this work. And that's going on around you and within you, that people aren't always receiving you in a way that is respectful and curious and compassionate. We also need to feel connected in a healthy way. A lot of people don't feel that, and they fill in the blanks with a negative idea of their invitation to be connected. I had a friend that started a new job. She called me like the first week and said, they're not very friendly, they're very cliquish. They invited me to a happy hour and I felt like nobody really wanted to talk to me. And I told her, I said, I want you to go to work tomorrow. And when you walk in the building, I want you to think the thought, I love this place. I love this company. I love these people. And I just want you to practice that for a little while. She called me that night and said, it's a completely different workplace. But what she didn't realize is she was coming in believing she was going to have a negative connection, which contributed to her not feeling healthy connection and not creating it. And that's often what's going on if we don't realize these are important. We also need to know that every one of us feels so much better when we can make contributions to one another. It happens that we do so more readily when there's like a crisis like 9/11 or something. But we need to make opportunities to let people contribute to us, because when we don't, they suffer. But what the weird problem is that we're all suffering from our own inferiority feelings. So we don't want to look like we need anything. We don't want to ask for things. And what we do in that is we rob each other of the opportunities to contribute. So what I want to do next is I want to spit in your soup. This is a phrase like inferiority complex that Alfred Adler coined. Spitting in your soup means that you think the soup that you're eating is wholesome and good. And if somebody spits in it, chances are you're not going to want it anymore. So I want to spit in some belief systems that have been around for centuries, that we all have lots of support for, but really are not so wholesome, so that you're more receptive to consider putting them aside for something better. What the soup I want to spit into are what we call the cultures of control. Control is where anytime we put a transactional relationship with people as more important than relationships, than purpose and values. When we're transactional, we're caring more about ourselves than we are other people. So I daily pray, please release me from the need for love, approval, and acceptance from others. Not that I don't need that, but I don't want to get it from other people, because all of a sudden I'm not giving, I'm taking. And that's what we want to know about control models, is it's really about how do I get things from people and how do I use external motivation to get them. One of the control tactics is to operate from an autocratic mind, an autocratic way of functioning. That teacher that said, if I catch any of you not doing the peace pledge, I'm going to give you a detention. That was an autocratic approach. The idea is, of yourself, you can't be trusted. I have to control you through commands and management. Do what I say or else. And what that develops are people that are resentfully compliant or people who rebel and resist. This one is sometimes a surprise to people. It's when we dangle carrots. If you really examine why we do this, it's usually because I want you to do what I want. And if you aren't given an inducement, my belief is that you're basically selfish and lazy. And so when we do that, we focus on kind of getting people to compete against each other, become more self-centered. They will often lose sight of the good reasons for doing something that have nothing to do with the carrot. And I want to just say before I go on to the next quadrants that these two quadrants are widely proposed, widely promoted, widely supported, widely accepted, and they quote unquote work in the short run. What people don't realize is they often have huge price tags that come along with them. And they're not the best way to get people to even be compliant, much less committed. So I just want you to realize they quote unquote look like they work, like if I held a gun to your head or I gave you enough money and it didn't feel too compromising, but they aren't really developing people. This one is kind of like a verbal form of the first two. It's where I hold a belief about people that somehow I'm in a superior position and I have the right to bestow judgment. That judgment could be favorable or unfavorable. It could be that I bestow criticism. It could be that I bestow praise. But the real accountability is your job is to please me. And what you cultivate are people who are people pleasers and brown nosers. And sometimes you also inspire rebellion as if who died made you die is how you might feel about somebody that's using a lot of judgment and criticism. This one is also a surprise. When we do things for people that they're capable of doing, that 8th grade student, we could have said, oh, you poor thing. That teacher's being a bully. We need to control that teacher. We need to get her in trouble. That would have been robbing that student of the opportunity of being intentional and being responsible and having a growth opportunity. So we do this all the time with the idea that if I overcompensate, you're somehow going to become responsible. Like the parents who cheated the system to try to get their kids in the Ivy League schools. Did they really believe they were going to create responsible adults by doing that? Or were they really creating entitled, self-centered, unmotivated people by doing that? The reason this soup needs to be spit in is it's because it's all about using external motivation, which reduces the internal motivation within people. So Einstein said this beautiful quote. It could be applied to a lot of things, but he basically said we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them. My contention is that the beliefs that we're holding about people, the thinking we're holding about people in the control models are the reason we have inferiority complex. They're the reasons we have the problems we have today. And it's really important to me that I connect those dots for you and that you are aware of what is so important about really letting that soup go. So what do you replace it with? Well, you replace it with a personal responsibility approach. Instead of all those limiting and fearful beliefs about people that they're selfish and lazy and undeserving and incompetent and untrustworthy, you hold a belief about people that they are great, or at least they want to be great. And that if they're not acting or showing up great, it's because these 4 core needs are not being met sufficiently, which is triggering an activated inferiority complex, which is a whole different thing than just kind of writing somebody off as not being great. The leadership approach, and I really want you to hear this, does not mean the leaders mentor the staff. It means that the leaders make sure everyone is mentoring everyone. So that it's set up that just like what the teacher was doing with the classroom, how do we help one another to become self-aware and then self-managing, where we change our behavior? How do we help one another to have the tools and the concepts to be socially aware and know how to manage our relationships with each other? We can't do that with knowledge alone. We need support systems. So the accountability approach is what I was showing with that 8th grade story. He was learning to own the task of managing his relationships, managing his productivity, managing his engagement. And what that develops in people is self-directedness, full engagement, an A game, if you will. Because this model is focused on developing people from the inside out, replacing extrinsic motivation with intrinsic motivation. This next concept is one of my absolute favorite, and I really want you to take it to heart for yourself as an individual, but also as a collective group. This is first and foremost a model of looking at your mindset. We all have times where we go into this place in our mind that says, I have no choice. And what we mean when we feel and think that way is that there's something dictating my choices that is not my own authority. It's some authority figure. It could be our actual boss or IRS or a police officer, or it could be an authority figure we've internalized from our past. Our parents or the Sister Mary Josephine in grade school. But what happens is when we hold that belief, one attitude we could take is that we'll resentfully comply. And when we're doing that, it is a reaction. It's not a response. It's a reaction to what we perceive as being dominated by the authority figure. When we do that, we're in a blind spot. This is super important. We don't feel responsible for what is in front of us. We don't feel responsible for our tasks, our relationships, or our outcomes. Our behavior is very Eeyore-ish. We come across like a victim. And that shows up in tone of voice, body language. If you're asking somebody to do something and they're in this mindset, you'll hear it in, okay, I'll do it. But you can feel that it's only going to be done at about a C- grade, This is where quiet quitting resides. And it's not even something a person is aware that they are a choice around, that it is their internal mindset that is the author of it. The other attitude we can take, which is also a reaction, is to rebel and resist. And again, we don't feel responsible for relationships, for tasks, for outcomes. We're actually coming from kind of a mean-spirited, no, I won't, you can't make me. Here's a very simple example. I was dating a man one time. We were both younger. He had fairly young children. He was a divorcee. And I asked him, I said, just out of curiosity, why don't you wear your safety belt? And he said, I'm not letting the government control me. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. That's a person that's not free. That's a person that's stuck in some mindset that they have to rebel against the government over a seatbelt rule. And to me, it was very unattractive because he was putting at risk his relationship with his kids, even his relationship with me, because it's not a responsible reaction. It's a responsible behavior. It's a reactive behavior. And he wasn't even considering what the outcomes could be. And this is how it is when we're on that side of the model. So it's really important that you recognize that. And this is in the handout that I'm providing you, along with some of the other things that I've already covered. But it asks you some questions to really help you recognize when you are in this mindset and when other people around you are in this mindset, because this is the root of whether we're in healthy belonging and significance or whether we're in disengagement and struggle. So what does it look like to not be in what's called other-directed? If we're not other-directed, we're in self-directed. And the difference is that when we're self-directed, we remember that we're autonomous. We remember that even when we choose to go to work, it's not a have to. The reality is we could just not go to work and choose to be homeless. Like, it is a free choice. When we remember that, we do this thing called self-reflection. What am I feeling and what do I want? Sometimes the answers are very simple and sometimes they're more layered. Maybe our first thing we're feeling is a really strong reaction and we don't necessarily want to make a decision from it. So we have to sit with, what am I feeling now? What do I want now? Okay, and the reason we can do that and say yes or no, or maybe negotiate something, is because when we're in this mindset, we're considering all the positive and negative consequences of every decision. So we're not in reaction, we're in a place where we're able to respond. And from that, the behavior comes across. We feel the responsibility of our decisions. We feel the responsibility for our tasks, our outcomes, our relationships, and our behavior shows up as accountable. Now, I want to show something to you. When we say yes from self-directed, it's got a totally different energy and outcome, and the relationships are different. When we say yes from a willingness and yes from resentful compliance. The resentful compliance is about a C- and comes with a lot of grudging. The agreement from self-directed is an A+ accountable yes. The same is true of a no. When we say no from self-directed, we're being led by our highest self, our biggest self, not our small self. And so even our no is going to be negotiated or discussed or accommodated in a way that is respectful to the outcomes, the tasks, and the relationships. It has a whole different quality of energy to it. So it's not how things look on the surface. That's why I want you to know getting people to comply is not the same as getting people to commit. And it's the same for yourself. I had a guy one time who saw the other directed side, and he said, oh my God, I've lived my whole life over there. I've either felt like a victim or I've been angry all the time. How do I get over there? So it's really important that you even have recognition of when you're in one worldview, one mindset, and one set of behaviors, and when you're not. When we're accountable, it's an inside job. It's when our beliefs, our attitudes, our response, our feelings, and our behavior all line up. We say what we mean and we mean what we say. And that's why I kind of bristle when I hear people say, let's hold each other accountable. You can't really do that. You can create conditions and conversations where people are more likely to be aware of when they're in other directed or self-directed, but the responsibility is to hold yourself accountable so that you're a role model for helping other people see when they are choosing accountability, but there's no you holding anyone accountable. It's really you saying, I'm going to make the commitment to hold myself accountable and to raise questions like, hey, is there a barrier that's making you feel resentful compliance? Is there a barrier that has you rebelling against this that you possibly could work through? And those are the kinds of things that help people move from other directed to self-directed. So I want you to kind of think about some of what I've been sharing and how important it is to recognize that despite some of this awareness, which some of you may have even been exposed to these facts, we have a tendency to filter them out, because to do something about them means we have to go out of our way. So anything worth having a transformation over requires some work. And if we're not willing to do it, then we might as well own that so that we're accepting of the consequences. If that 8th grade boy had said, I don't want peace, I wouldn't have been able to help him. I would have said, well, I'm not going to be able to help you because my purpose is to create a world where people love their lives. And if you are all out for vengeance, you know, I'm not going to be able to support that. So people need to know whether they're willing to go out of their way. The other thing that I think is even a harder thing to face is that when it comes to human systems, we don't like to think we could be out of date. We feel like it's a failure if we're outdated or we need an upgrade. Think about that. We don't feel bad about upgrading our phones or our computers. We're even sometimes looking forward to the new features. But yet many of us, especially leaders, and I don't mean to pick on leaders, but leaders tend to feel as if they've arrived. They have the title, they have the money, and sometimes if they're strong enough, they can be humble enough to say, I could be out of date and I'm willing to be upgraded. But if they're not, they will feel threatened by a disruption in the status quo. So it's really important to ask yourself, am I willing to go out of the way to learn something new? And am I willing to consider that as a species, it's time to go from win-lose to win-win and to update the conditions and conversations. So the last part of this talk, I want to really just go over how do you implement this type of a model? Because first of all, you got a little picture into what kind of model it is, but how do you actually build that inside of an organization? How do you scale it? How do you sustain it? How do you make it available to everybody? That is the key. So I'm going to briefly go over these steps. The first thing you have to do is make sure that the CEO and the highest level leaders know what you're transforming from into. They have a culture. The word culture itself is like the word parenting. You could have 10 different parents in a room and they would all think of a different idea of what healthy parenting is. So we would want the CEO and the senior team to know that you're transforming into a responsibility-based culture, not one that's based in control. You'd want to measure things like trust, alignment, engagement, and a return on investment target so that you can actually see we've started here and now we're moving in a progressive manner that's measurable. You want to get all of the people that are leading at all the different levels in the organization to understand what the implementation is so that they can get on board with it and they can be part of the development of the plan or the following of the plan. It requires that all the leaders, in a sense, begin by making the building of trust and the environment where people can be self-directed very important. Now, I would say that it's also equally important that everyone from the frontline staff up also begin to ensure that. And that's what our implementation is like. It's not saying it's on the managers and supervisors and senior leaders. It's really on everyone to build that environment. It's creating a way of taking values and purpose and all the behaviors. Values are really behaviors and ways of being that build trust. And how do we create an operational model where this is happening? And I'm going to give you an example of that in a little bit. The most important end game that you're considering is how do we give everybody opportunities to cross-function on teams? That classroom meeting was an example of that, where the students were part of the problem solving. When I raised my 5 children, by the time they were 5 years old, they all knew how to run a family meeting because we wanted them to feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. And they weren't going to do it standing on the sidelines. We had to give them the reins. We were able to give them that sense of they are lovable because we were receptive to them. And that's what, if you're doing anything at all with agile transformation or digital transformation, you know that the new way of managing complexity is through simultaneous iterative builds. And it requires collaboration amongst cross-functional teams. It's what you have in your ERG. You have a cross-functional team. So how do you get it so that everybody knows how to lead and follow, and everybody knows how to build trust and create collaborative ways with each other on all different types of things? And then what can come of that is that everyone knows how to participate in really improving and upgrading all the systems and processes, not only of a culture, but of the business model itself and the business objectives. So I want to just tell you that in our viewpoint, we take a clue from the best practices in education. There's a study that was done, and a lot of educators are doing what's called flipped classrooms. What they found is that if they took students and they gave them information in a passive classroom, one and done, the kids would remember what they learned just long enough for the test, and a couple months later, they wouldn't remember it. So they found that if they gave the students like a packet of information or a video to watch, and then they had to fill out a worksheet on it or a workbook on it, and then they came together the next day and they discussed it as peers, and they had peer-led discussions, and they had application and why is this relevant? Is this relevant? How would you apply it? How would you try it on, like that 8th grade classroom? They found that the students remembered all the concepts and tools that they were taught much, much longer. They held on to them, they retained that. So in our model, there's assessments and reassessments. There's people learning how to function inside of a certain kind of a culture model. Everybody does individual work. Everybody does workbook exercises. Everybody does a post-training reflective survey. Then everyone comes together in small groups of 10 people or less that are mixed levels, where the CEO is in the same group as the receptionist, is in the same group as the mid-level manager. And they're all taking turns rotating the leadership, just like I did with my kids, where sometimes they would lead the meeting and sometimes we would lead the meeting as parents. So what you're doing is through all of this, then everybody partners up and they do peer and reverse mentoring every month. Everyone does this. And it's a Socratic method. It's not one where anybody has to have higher seniority or higher knowledge. It's really about asking Socratic questions so that people will become more aware and more self-managing. And then the environment is such that the company or organization integrates what's being learned into the operations of the business so that it's front and center over time. And then there are subject matter experts in the culture model that onboard new employees, and they become the ones that oversee new people into the culture model. Because in the beginning, it requires some oversight, but you develop that internally. So that's a lot of touches on new concepts and tools, but it's required because without it, you don't really have changed behavior. You don't really have a transformation. Hopefully end with this. I think there may be one more slide, but I want to tell you a story to help you understand why is it important to go out of your way to put in the time to have an immersive process. Why does it matter? I have a client that has 550 employees. And the CEO said, rather than do that immersive process, I just want you to take all 52 of our leaders, everyone from supervisor up to executives. I want you to just take us through all the concepts and tools in your year-long culture process. And they just did it over a period of time, a couple hours each week, until they were done kind of skimming everything. In one of the tools, I can't see anybody's face on the picture, but I'm going to just pick Randy Hewlin. Let's say Randy was in this group and I taught this tool to the whole group, and then I asked everybody to do this tool with one another. It's one of about 30 tools we teach. And it's one out of 2 tools that address gossip head on. So I would say to Randy, I promise you that I will not say bad things about you behind your back. I promise you that I will come to you directly if I have a problem with you and work it out with you. I promise that if somebody comes up and starts to say something bad about you, I will stop them. I will respectfully stop them. I might offer them healthy venting, but I'm not going to let them rip on you. I'm also going to try to talk them into taking their issue back to you so they don't hold on to the grudge or take it to other people. Now, if you think about that, that sounds like a pretty great tool. I would imagine you might all think, but it's not an easy tool. The reality is, if you sit and reflect on all of those commitments, some of us wouldn't be able to do any of them. Some of us wouldn't be able to do some of them because we don't have the confidence or the tools or the sense of safety, psychological safety to do that tool. What if I go to my boss with a problem I'm having with him and I get fired by him or her? So, but this group of 52 leaders, they were really excited to go do this tool with one another. I assigned it to them. They went and did it with each other face to face. Well, what happened was when they were done with all of this review, they hadn't done this deep dive. One of them called me and said, you know what? I'm working with 8 of those leaders, and I myself was in the group. And we know all this stuff now, but we're still having all these interpersonal problems. Do you think you could come in and work with us and help us to apply what we've learned? And I said, yeah. I said, I'm going to be talking to your CFO this afternoon. I'll find out if there's budget for this. So I called the CFO, who was also in this training, and she says to me, oh my gosh, that group really needs your help. The leader of that group was saying bad things about me in a meeting, and it upset 2 of the people in the meeting so much that they came and told me what he said about me. And I said, I said, did you ask them if they stopped him when he was saying bad things about you? Because don't they have a mind trust with you? And she was like, oh, no. I said, did you ask them if they went to him to talk about the problem because they were upset with him? She goes, no. And I said, when you realized you had him talking about you and that was a problem for you, did you go to him directly, which is your commitment to him? She goes, no. She goes, I took it to his boss and I tattled on him, and his boss was at the meeting and he didn't stop him either. Nobody stopped him. And then she goes, what is wrong with all of us? And I said to her, nothing is wrong. I want you to know that when you got that tool, it was like an exciting new shiny tennis racket. And you assumed it would make you a tennis player. But you can't become a tennis player unless you watch a few games, you learn the rules of the game, you recognize whether you're capable and competent, what you have to learn. You get out on the tennis court, you might have some coaching and some support, and then you can fall in love with tennis, and then you can be good at tennis. And the same is true of workplace culture transformation. It's not as simple as a one and done. If it was, all these workshops and peace pledges and all these things we do would be working. So I just want you to realize whatever implementation you adopt, make sure that it incorporates things like best practices from education. So good, I did okay. My fast talking paid off. We have 9 minutes for questions and answers or the sharing of any ahas. So if you would just jump on, just unmute yourself to ask any questions that you might have written down or just be thinking of, please do.
Judy, hi.
Sorry. I can monitor the chat window if somebody wants to ask their question to chat. I can monitor that too, Judy.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Judy, this is Rosalba. I have a question.
Yes.
You gave a lot of information, a lot of great points. The one thing that I'm going to refer to is the responsibility-based theme that you're teaching on today, kind of that overarching umbrella that hits all of your points underneath. Would you, to me, that just means another word for respect. What do you think about that? Because it's
respect. We see respect as one of the 8 values that build trust, but I look at respect more like humanizing people. When we respect people, we don't treat them like they're objects. We don't treat them transactionally. So we can be respectful of people and still go gossip. So part of what's the bigger umbrella is how do we build the understandings to recognize when we're in inferiority complex and pull ourselves out of it? How do we recognize when to bring in systems that build those 4 core needs and remove the things that break those 4 core needs? Do you see how the level of responsibility that's more overarching includes respect, but it's what are all the practical applications of respect? You know, if I asked this group, how many of you think love is the answer to the problem in our world? Most people would raise their hand, but most of us don't know how to love. We don't have practical ways to do it consistently or to do it well. And that's why we often fall into these defaults of gossip and the ways that we, deal with our inferiority complex. Does that help a little bit?
It does help. And I think for me, if you truly, truly respect the person, then you wouldn't gossip. Then you wouldn't go behind their back. Then you wouldn't. But there's a dance there. The reality is that people make mistakes, and then there's a healthy, you said healthy venting, which was really good for me as well. Like, you know, what does healthy venting look like? Because I think there's a thin line, there's a thin road there where you can.
Right. Well, and I want you to see that, yes, you're absolutely right. That tool is a very good alternative for what we do when we say we need to vent. We're usually blaming and gossiping, and unless we're doing a healthy version. But I want to give you a different example to show you how respecting somebody isn't about just not gossiping. There was a woman one time, she was a secretary and she was working for a CIO who was doing this culture model, but she also reported to a CFO that was not. And he was a person that was proud of leading by intimidation. And one day she realized she was really frustrated with him because he would cancel meetings and he wouldn't tell her. And so she'd go to the location and she'd be freaked out. Did I get the wrong place, the wrong date, the wrong time? She learned a tool called the frustration tool, where you say, I don't like it when, and you state the behavior you don't like, because what I most desire is, and then asking him for a behavior change. So she said to him, I don't like it when you cancel meetings and you don't let me know, because what I most want is I want to do a really good job for you and know where I'm supposed to be. And I also want good mutual teamwork with you. So what I want is, would you be willing to call me, text me, or email me when you cancel a meeting? Would you be willing to do that? And this was his reaction. She was being respectful, but she was also knowing how to communicate her frustration without hurting anybody or without being a doormat. His response was, lady, who the heck do you think you are? I'm your boss. You're not my boss. I pay your paycheck. How dare you? And she came back to me and she told me that. And I said, okay, that's his yard, right? How did you feel about your yard? What you did? And she goes, well, that I'm proud of. And I said, then hold on to that, because you were teaching him how to treat you. And then what happened is she called me about 4 months later and said, you know what? He's never done that to me again. And now he's coming around asking, what is this stuff you guys are doing over here? Because the people in his departments were jumping ship to that department because they heard the difference. So respect is so much more than just not gossiping. It's having the skills, the support. That woman went to her mentor and practiced the tool before she took it to that CFO, who was an authority figure. She could have technically gotten fired, but he would have had a hard time firing her over that, right? But it was still a scary experience. So part of it is equipping people to have psychological safety, to have the tools and concepts. And it's way bigger than one tool. We have over 30 tools. That one that I gave was just an example of how it requires more than just a one and done.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, Judy.
Anyone else? We still have time for a few more.
Hey, Judy, this is Luis. You mentioned a topic, culture change is people change. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, well, one of the things we run into is we work with people in diversity and inclusion. We work with people that are doing agile transformation. We work with people who are doing digital transformation, people that are aware of what the trends are taking us toward. Like, part of growth is required that we recognize the speed of change and the way the world is changing. When we're going through those transformations, if we don't transform the people, those transformations don't go well. So when we're working with a company that's doing agile transformation or digital transformation, if the people don't know how to talk to one another, if they don't know how to build trust, if they don't know how to communicate effectively, if they don't know how to take turns leading and following, I'm telling you, there's a lot of people out there that you put them in a group and they're like, just tell me what to do, because they haven't learned how to be inductive reasoners or how to be problem solvers like that 8th grader. So you can't really bring about an evolutionary transformation in the world or in your company if you're not also transforming the people that have to build that together, right? It's just too old school. It's too slow moving. I hope that helps you to understand what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We have 2 minutes. If anybody has anything to share or to ask.
Judy, Kevin Johansson here. Maybe just a comment. We have, so I lead our agile transformation here at NiceHorse. So we've stepped into some of these areas, and a lot of what you're saying, you're talking about here makes a lot of sense. And we've learned a little bit through that transformation as we've started the last couple of years. You know, an area that we've seen is as we roll out our new product teams and product launches, is we have to educate and train the team, and I mean top down, in how to approach and work together differently, and what we prioritize and value differently to make that work. And it's a lot of what you're talking about here, people over process, right? And things like that. But it starts with sponsors, executive sponsors, all the way down through the entire stack of how the team works.
Yeah.
And so just a comment there that's something we've learned a little bit, and we're learning and continuing to learn and improve on, but it's how do we set the team up to be successful there with the right tools and the right approach to do that.
I think you're on the right track. It's just how to, we've codified it and we've built it in a consistency, and we require that people from the top down are involved. In fact, I was working with a company out of New York recently, and it's a lot of surgeons, kind of, a lot of surgeons don't like to show their dark side. They didn't want to mix the levels in the small groups. They're like, well, let's just keep the managers all in their own group. And I was like, no, because you want to break those artificial barriers.
Right.
And they said to me, but their managers are kind of rough around the edges. And I go, that's okay. People need to see that we're all human, that we're all learning together. We're all upgrading together. We're not perfect. And that's the beauty of that. So I love it that you guys are already seeing it. Most of our Agile coaches and consultants that get certified in our work, they say this should have been brought in before the Agile methodology was brought in, because they realize that it's kind of backtracking, trying to get the culture piece in there.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
You
great.
all have been an awesome group. I had a handout that I sent forward. It will be forwarded to you all from Carlos or Alex. And anyone that wants to write to us, please do. I'm happy to answer any questions or have any conversations. I wish I could sit and talk to every one of you.
So thank you, Judy, for today. Appreciate the conversation. And then for everyone, thank you again for joining the call and pivoting at the beginning. Shows how you can adapt and have the right attitude to really focus on today's topic. Next week, again, featuring another virtual event. Be on the lookout for an invitation. If you haven't received one, please contact me or one of your committee members. We'll be featuring Leah Marquez Peterson. That is on Thursday, the 29th. So hope to see everyone there. And again, Judy, thank you so much for your time. And everyone, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and you're welcome. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.